The final chapter of the Gospel of Luke shows the awareness of the author of the problematic aspects of ascribing Davidic messiahship to Jesus. It likewise points to a quest for solution. In this chapter, we first are told about two of Jesus' disciples going a few days after their teacher's crucifixion to a village called Emmaus in the vicinity of Jerusalem. At least one of the existing traditions locates Emmaus somewhere near the place we are now. On that side, there are archaeological excavations and a monastery. Behind me you can see a Roman bath, roughly from that period, which might have belonged to the city of Emmaus. In those days it was a secluded spot, but now we are pretty close to the main highway leading from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. That's why the noise. On their way, the resurrected Jesus appears to the two disciples, but they did not recognize him. The following exchange then takes place. It's Luke chapter 24, starting from verse 17. And he, Jesus, said to them, "What is this conversation which you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know things that have happened there in these days?" And he, Jesus, said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since this happened." The problem is thus spelled out. Jesus was recognized as a prophet, and he was and is definitely such, and this in no way contradicts his tragic fate. Unfortunately, this is what often happens to prophets. They are rejected and persecuted, a biblical motif which is expressed forcefully at the end of the second book of Chronicles. But we, the disciples say, hope that he would be something more, that he would bring redemption as the Davidic Messiah, and in that there was an obvious failure. And instead of initiating redemption, our messianic candidate has been already dead for 3 days. Having outlined the problem, Luke also indicates possible solution. It's further on in the chapter, starting from verse 25. And he said to them, "O foolish men and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. The solution is thus to be found in a drastic reinterpretation of Scripture. In other words, what you have thought of as a picture of messianic salvation derived from Scripture should be amended, based on a previously hidden understanding of the same Scripture, revealed under Jesus' own authority. This reinterpretation now includes the motif of the Messiah's suffering and death, followed by his resurrection. We also have here a picture for a first century of the Common Era canonical outlook, with Scripture being perceived as containing the Torah of Moses and the prophetic writings. Interestingly enough, later on in the same chapter, when resurrected Jesus appears among the apostles in Jerusalem, this picture is amended. It's verse 44. Then he said to them, "These are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the Torah of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures and said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead." Here we see that the Scripture is perceived as containing not 2 but 3 main parts. It is interesting that at Qumran, also in the same scroll, 4QMMT, a similar fluctuation between Moses and prophets and Moses, prophets and David is discerned. It seems that both in the scrolls and in the early layers of the Jesus movement tradition, David was viewed as a special kind of prophet. On the other hand, the appearance of Psalms as a separate category may indicate the process of formation of the third part of Jewish canon, so-called writings, of which Psalms would become the first one. Whatever the case, the author of Luke clearly wishes to argue that hints at Messiah's crucifixion and resurrection could be discerned all over Jewish sacred literature. This is the exegetical program of the nascent Jesus movement. Not to ignore the problem of Messiah's death, but to address it head-on by the means of biblical reinterpretation.